We're going to talk today about Google Forms in Google Classroom. You're probably already familiar with these two icons, the teacher and the student, that have been in a lot of your Zoom sessions probably. We'll mostly be looking at things from the teacher's perspective today, but I'm also going to give you a chance to be students and fill out a form and see what that looks like on the student side of Google Classroom. So there is a video in here. I'm not going to play the video for you, but I will give you a little tip about videos from Google. They tend to go really fast, as you might have noticed. Once you hit play on a YouTube video like this, down here in the right corner, and I won't do it for you now, but down here in that right corner, a little gear icon pops up among some other icons. If you click that gear icon, you can choose the playback speed. You can slow it down. So I typically slow those videos down to about 0.5, so I have a chance of actually seeing what's going on. It makes the presenter, the person doing the voiceover in the video, sound really slow, but at least I can tell what's happening and it doesn't go too fast for me. So look for the gear icon after you hit play, choose playback speed 0.5. Reverse tip, if your students make videos and you're trying to watch them all and you have limited time, you can turn the playback speed up to like double time and watch them on speed, and then it takes you only half as long to watch those student videos. So, little tip. All right. Creating a Google form or a quiz in Google Classroom is a lot like creating any other assignment, especially at first. You start at the Create button, you click Quiz Assignment. After you click Quiz Assignment, yeah, it's right there. You will come to a screen that looks like this. It's much like any other assignment window. You give it a title, you give it instructions, you can add other materials if you like, and attached there is also this blank quiz conveniently created for you already by Google. Note that the grade importing slider is turned on. You want to leave that on so it'll bring your scores into Google Classroom when you tell it to. And I want to say a word for a moment about locked mode on Chromebooks. This sounds like a really great, tempting idea, but remember, we are in distance learning situation, and this only works on Chromebooks. And many of our students are not using district Chromebooks at this point. They're using their personal devices or their parents' devices or something else. If you turn on locked mode, it will effectively lock those kids out because they won't be able to take your quiz because they're not on a district managed Chromebook. So please avoid using locked mode, especially during distance learning. And I have some reservations about it even in the classroom. If the quiz you're giving is in any way more than 5 or 6 questions and any kid's internet hiccups while they're taking that quiz, it locks them out from trying again and creates headaches for you. You have to go in and change a bunch of settings in your form so that child can retake it. So, just walk around your classroom like we always did. All right, back to our blank quiz. So let's click on that blank quiz and see what it looks like. Once you start a quiz, it's, by the way, and double check for me, do you see in your upper right hand corner of Zoom, do you see a little thing that looks like maybe it says recording or it's got a little red button? I just want to make sure that's really working because I can't confirm it on my side. So this blank quiz form is like any other Google form. If you've used Google Forms before, except that it's already got the quiz feature turned on. It already has this answer key. Thank you. Already there for you. And we're going to go over some of the other aspects of forms. When you're doing forms with kids, especially this blank quiz, it's right there. It says untitled question. And you're so excited to write that first question. You've had it in your head. You've been sort of writing this quiz in your head before. And you get there and you want to just put that first question there. The first question is not your first question. The first question is, what is your name? That is always the first question. Google Classroom will import the scores, and that should tell you who scored what. But if you ever want to look at this data in a spreadsheet, you're going to want to know what your students' names are. And so always start with what's your name. And I usually ask for last name, first name, because I teach high school and that makes my life more organized. If you're a secondary teacher, I also highly recommend having a question, a multiple choice question that asks students what period they're in. And please leave out the period that's your prep period because kids will pick that just to annoy you. So ask them what period they're in, make that multiple choice so they can't just type something random, and then also ask them their name. 2 important things. Also, you'll notice up here, this little X appeared over the send button. Please do not use the send button. It looks very tempting, and you're like, oh, I'm ready to send my quiz. Like, nope, that's not how it works. You'll go back to that other tab in Google Classroom and click assign to send this quiz to your kids. You will never need the send button. The send button is very deceptively dangerous because it would allow you to send your form without ever actually proofreading it. And I know you've seen this, forms where one of the questions still says option 1, right? Like this, because they wrote their form and they forgot to change that or take that answer choice away from one of their questions. So you're always actually going to go first to that eyeball and preview your form the way a user would see it, whether it's kids or adults. You're going to preview your forms. It's kind of like writing something important and then printing it out on paper for proofreading purposes to make sure you really see what you're seeing. Make sure it all works the way you want it to, especially if you're a novice to forms. You definitely want to click the eyeball, fill out the form yourself a few times, make sure it's really doing what you want it to do. As you fill it out, pretending to be a student of your own, you'll think of things you meant to add, or you'll think of a different way you wanted to ask that question. Trust me, it's good best practice. The send button would allow you to just put in someone's email and send them the form, but you'd be sending them a form that you had never proofread. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. There's this puzzle piece up here. If you're new to forms, don't bother with it. Don't touch it. That's for add-ons that are a lot more like advanced in the form manipulation world. Talk to me in 12 months. The paint palette here is for customizing either the header of your form or the color scheme of your form. And you want to do that. You don't always want to give your kids a form that looks exactly like the same form you gave them yesterday or last week, because they'll think they already did it. So you want to make them different colors. Like, yeah, I did the purple one. This is the green one. I did the red one. This is the yellow one, right? You want to make their forms different colors. And I highly recommend adding different header images to the top of your form. There's a huge range of choices that Google provides that you can just choose from, or you can upload your own. So using header images that even vaguely relate to the content you're talking about will also help students create that visual that connects with what they're doing in your form and keep them from emailing you and telling you they already did it. The gear icon has a lot of important settings for forms, and we are going to spend some time on those in a few minutes, but I just wanted you to know sort of what this tour was up here. And these 3 dots, we'll go to a live form and I'll show you that too, but under those 3 dots, you'll find a lot of helpful options, like to make a copy of your form or to add a collaborator to your form and things like that. And the little picture of my face just means that I'm signed into my Google account while I do this. All right, over here you have the option to put a star on your form. That would just make it a little easier to find in your Google Drive. You also have a little folder icon that would tell you where your form is. If you create the form through Google Classroom, you will find that form in your Google Drive in your Google Classroom folder. If you would like to put it somewhere else that would make more sense to you, like the folder for the unit you're doing, you'd have to click this little folder icon and move it. So if you have a folder where you organize teaching materials for your units, just keep in mind that Google Classroom is going to put this form that you just created in a Google Classroom folder for that class. All right. A lot of information on the screen, but most of it is very obvious. So let me just go through it quickly. Here's your last name, first name. I recommend the capitalizations. It helps kids get it right. Duplicate question is just what it means. It makes a copy of the same question, adds more. So if you're going to ask the same question or versions of the same question with different answer choices or with different questions, you can just use duplicate. Delete the question would remove it from your form. Make it required means students have to respond to it or they cannot submit the form. The 3 dots next to that do things like data validation that you may or may not be ready for. We'll go there later. We'll talk about the different question types on the next iteration of this slide. And then this floating bar over here on the right-hand side has actually nothing to do with the question on the left. This floating bar is what comes after this question. It's about what comes next. What's the next thing you want to add? So the plus sign would add the next question. This one here would import questions. So maybe you want to bring over some questions from an earlier quiz. That's a really great practice to have kids revisit earlier questions if you're using this for assessments. Or maybe you just created a form for one class and you teach a different level of, the same course, honors and regular. You want to just import some questions and change some things. You can add a text box. As an English teacher, I love to add a text box to my forms because I can take a short poem or a paragraph, insert that text in the form by adding that text box, and then ask the kids some follow-up questions about it. You can add an image. and then ask students questions about the image. So for those of you who are world language teachers or math teachers, you can add images and then ask kids questions about the image, either in the target language, or if it's math, you can say, you know, which of these vertices is 90 degrees, and they have to answer you. You can embed a video. YouTube works great. You embed that video and then ask them some follow-up questions about the video. And you can insert a page break. I love this because it looks like the symbol for the Human Rights Campaign, but it's really a page break. There is no limit to the number of words you can add in a text box. You can have, I mean, obviously, like, you don't want more than kids can read at a time. So a couple of paragraphs, a big chunk. I wouldn't, you know, it's fatiguing to read text on a screen like that, especially when you're in the midst of also trying to answer questions about it. So you don't want to make it too long, but you can add quite a bit. I don't think there's a limit. Don't go too crazy. Page break is what happens when you've been filling out a form and then the form says next. That's what, because there was a page break. So you can ask the students some questions, then put in a page break, they click next, and then you can ask them some more questions. So if you've got one of those quizzes where like the answer to one question is in a previous question, put a page break in between and they can't go back and look at the previous question. Page breaks also reduce test fatigue. So, or form fatigue, as I call it, because if you go to fill out a form and it has 20 questions on one page, you're like, oh my God, it's a long form. But if it's got 5 questions and it says next, and then 5 more questions and it says next, it's a little more doable. Kind of like putting breaks in paragraphs, you know, it's easier to read. All right, question types, let's look at those. There's 11 different question types in Google Forms. There's a short answer and a paragraph. And I want to say something about that for a minute. I'm an English teacher. I think a short answer question is 3 or 4 sentences. Google thinks a short answer question is 3 or 4 words. So remember that if you give a short answer question type, the person writing the answer will only have a tiny little like 2-inch box to write their answer. If you want them to write a sentence, you have to make it a paragraph question. You can set size limits on the paragraph questions. You can tell them, you know, this must be, you can either do, that's where the, sorry, these 3 dots here where it says data validation. I'm gonna tell you what that's about. You can either use the data validation to say that your paragraph answer must be at least 100 characters, or you can say, or the opposite, you can say it can't be more than 500 characters. So I will often limit my students and say, you know, tell me about what you read this week, must be, you know, less than 280 characters. And they're like, you know, like, it's a tweet, you're writing a tweet, it's 280 characters. And for my, you know, real go-getter kids who want to write me a novel about their novel, I'm like, no, you got to cut it down. I'm teaching them to be succinct. Multiple choice is obvious. Check boxes. Our students take state tests that involve questions called multiple select. And those are checkbox questions where they have to pick all the right answers and none of the wrong answers. And that's a very challenging question type for our students because they're so used to the multiple choice, pick one and go on, that they don't know what to do with themselves when they get to checkboxes. They pick one and go on. But if it's a checkbox question, there's always got to be at least 2 right answers. So a great thing you can do for kids is give them checkbox questions in your forms so that they practice with that kind of question type. Drop down is what it says. You can paste in a whole list of things and they can choose from the list. I would use drop downs for things that are sort of too long for multiple choice. So teachers, I know elementary teachers will use a drop down. They'll paste in their entire class list and ask students to vote on like student of the month or something like that. So drop down is great for that. File upload, you probably won't use in a Google form, especially within Google Classroom, because kids can just attach files to their assignments in Google Classroom anyway. At Point Loma, we've used the file upload in the past with our scholarship applications where the seniors had to upload like their letters of recommendation and things like that to their application. Linear scale, on a scale of 1 to 5, how you feeling? On a scale of 1 to 5, strongly agree, strongly disagree. Multiple choice grid, checkbox grid, you can play with those. They're a little trickier. Date and time you probably won't need to use. And we're gonna move on. All right. 2 modes for forms. We've been looking at the edit mode side of a form. This is where you can edit all your questions, change them, add to them. There's these floating boxes in between. You can click on any question you want, and then the floating box will appear next to it, and you can add the next thing after it. So if I decided I want a page break right here about how much do you already know about Google Forms, if I wanted to put a section break there, I would click on that question. This little floating box would appear next to it, and then I would click on the section break and it would break that section right there. So kind of pick where you want to be in your form and add whatever you would like next to it. The other side of the form is the view mode. This is what students see when they fill it out. It doesn't have any of the editing options. They can't change anything about the questions. All they can do is fill out the form and submit it. You'll notice it's automatically collecting email addresses. That's important. I recommend leaving that feature turned on your quizzes. It'll force students to be signed into their Sandy.net account to do your form, but if they're in your Google Classroom, they're already in their Sandy.net account anyway, so it's fine. And then up here on the edit side, there's questions and responses. So we've so far just been talking about the questions side. In a few minutes, we'll talk about responses side. So just wanted you to have all that in mind. So edit side, what you do when you're playing with your form, view side when people are filling out your form. Now, if you're looking at the view side of your form and you own the form, you will also see this little pencil icon here. Your students won't see that if they're filling out your form. They don't have edit access to your form. But if you're looking at a form that you happen to have edit access to, you click that little pencil icon and it will take you back to the edit version of the form. And I sometimes find this is the fastest way to get to the edit version. I'll have a form linked on my class blog and I want to edit that form for some reason or see some responses to that form. I'll just go to the form on the blog, see my little pencil icon, click on it, and boom, I'm right back to my editing page. It's a little faster than finding it in my Google Drive sometimes. All right. In edit mode, we talked about questions. We're going to talk for a moment about responses. Right now, this form has 0 responses, which it won't in a few minutes because you're actually going to fill it out. You'll notice that it is currently accepting responses. I could turn that off. If I didn't want to let students fill out a form, I could turn that off, and I could also customize the message that they see when I turn it off. Like, sorry, too late to take this quiz, or hey, our session is full, you can't sign up anymore. You can turn forms off and give people a little message there. And then this little green icon here is the Google icon for Spreadsheets. Now, I know this is a trigger warning. I know some people have issues with Spreadsheets. I personally am still kind of terrified of Excel, and I don't mind admitting that. But Google Sheets are different. They're easier and a lot more user-friendly, and I have a lot of things to support you with them. So the only way to really see all the data that students submit on your forms is to go to the spreadsheet. Don't be afraid. I'm going to help you. All right, I think that's what I have to show you there. Oh, one more thing. This slide's a little out of order, but when you're editing a question, and this GIF will repeat, but when you're editing the question, and because it's a quiz, Google has added this answer key feature. And so let me talk you through it. You're looking at your question, and you need to tell Google which answer is right, so you click answer key. There we go. You tell it that the right answer to this question is 11, and you can change the point value, 1, 2, or whatever you like it to be. And then you say done. All right. So that'll go, probably let it run one more time. When you're editing the question, click the answer key, choose the right answer so Google knows which one to score correctly. And you can have more than one right answer. You can actually select every single one of those if you want and make them all the right answer. So even on a multiple choice question, there doesn't have to be just one right answer. All right. Go back here. Remember this little gear icon we talked about earlier? We're gonna look at some things that are under that. So imagine I just click that gear icon, and then I click the gear icon again to get past the answer key slide. So gear icon hides the wonderful settings panel that has general tab, a presentation tab, and a quizzes tab. We're gonna start at general, we're gonna work our way across. So under the general tab, a few things you need to know about the settings of your form. Number one, this form is collecting email addresses. You don't have to turn that on. You can turn it off. When we do our 9th grade course evaluation at the end of the year, we turn that off because we do want it to be truly anonymous and let kids just really tell us what they think. But you can send people response receipts, but if you send your students response receipts, they probably won't get them because for most of our kids, their email is not working. So San Diego Unified generally doesn't have working email for kids. I've heard some principals are working on getting that opened up, but your mileage may vary basically on that. Requiring sign-in. On any form you're going to give your student, I recommend you restrict it to users in San Diego Unified. If they're doing this through Google Classroom, it's going to be restricted anyway. So that's a good thing to leave on. If you are giving your form to adults, if you make a form in some other capacity, if you go to your Google Drive and make a form, which you can do and I'll show you how, but if you're just making a Google form because you want to ask people where you think we should do our staff luncheon or what they want to vote on for the schedule for next year, I recommend turning this off. If you restrict it to users in San Diego Unified School District, you will limit the number of people who can fill it out. If it's staff at your school, yes, they have an account and they should be signed in. That's true. But often they're not. And they come to your form and they click the link and it says it's restricted and they can't fill it out because they're not signed into their Google account. Also, if you're going to send a form to parents, remember they are not users in San Diego Unified, so you have to turn off this restriction if you're expecting parents to fill it out. If you're going to email it to parents and say, or put it on your class webpage or something and say, hey parents, can you donate supplies to our art project or something like that? You don't want that to be restricted or they won't be able to fill it out. You can limit it to one response. That's great if you want kids to vote on something. Letting people edit after they submit is a little weird. I don't usually use that. And then see summary charts and text responses. If you're giving your kids a quiz, you really don't want them to see the summary of how everybody else did. Even if it's a summary, you still don't want them to know. All right, and then you click save on that. And we can look at presentation. There's the option to show the progress bar, shuffle the question order. Some teachers think if their kids are shuffling the question order that it's going to prevent them from cheating. It's not. They're still going to call their friends and work it out and figure it out and do it together. If you're really using a Google form at this point to actually test your children, you're really only testing how many friends they have. So, you know, give projects, give writing assignments, give short answer questions where they have to write multiple, you know, sentences and things. So it's really them, because shuffle the question order won't prevent cheating. And then the confirmation message is also hidden under presentation. Now, normally when you fill out a Google form, the default message you get is, you know, your response has been recorded, or thank you, your response has been recorded. It's very automatic and it's very robotic. You can change that. You can make that confirmation anything you want. And in the classroom, I will typically make this something I want my students to do next, as in, thanks for filling out the quiz. Please go back to Google Classroom and mark it as done, because Google Classroom doesn't automatically do that for them. And I'll show you why in a minute. It's not a good reason, but it's the way it is. But you can put anything in there. You're like, thanks for taking the quiz. Now please read your book till everyone else is done. Or thanks for taking the quiz. Don't forget to turn in X, Y, and Z, you know, tomorrow. You can leave them little messages there. And they don't all read them, but, you know, enough of them read them that you get some mileage out of that. And then on the quizzes tab, you'll notice the slider bar is on to make this a quiz. You can turn that off. There's a lot of great reasons to use forms besides assessment. Data collection is a beautiful thing. Formative assessments are a beautiful thing. You don't necessarily have to make every form you create into a quiz. If you create the form through Google Classroom, it will automatically have this turned on, but you can come turn it off and just ask kids, how are you doing? Remember not to use locked mode on Chromebooks because that's a bad idea right now. It's probably a bad idea all the time, but most of the time, you know, if you were in the classroom with kids, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but right now, don't do it. Whether you release the grade immediately or later is up to you. If your quiz, and we'll see this in a minute, if your quiz has short answer questions that you need to grade manually, and remember, I'm an English teacher. When I say short answer, I mean they wrote a few sentences. So if your quiz has questions that you need to grade manually and you choose immediately after each submission, your students will think they failed, because you'll give them a 10-question quiz that had 5 multiple choice and 3 paragraph questions, or 4 or 5 paragraph questions. They'll get 5 out of 5 on the multiple choice and nothing for those paragraph questions because you haven't graded them yet. So Google will immediately tell them you have 5 out of 10 and they'll think they failed. So I recommend always having the release grade be later after manual review. And that way you can grade those written answers that students left you and then give them their grade after that. Also, if you choose immediately after each submission, it's going to send them basically a copy of the form with every question and what they marked and what the right answer was. So if you are trying to use this for an assessment, even between, you know, first period and second period, you know, a savvy kid is going to get that results page and immediately take a picture of it or a screenshot of it and send it to their friend in the next period. So yes, cheating on Google Forms can be rampant. You have to use them wisely and carefully. You can choose whether they see their missed questions, their correct answers, and their point values. All that's up to you. You click save on that. And we're going to go try this. Yes, we're right on time. I'm going to ask you to go to classroom.google.com. You will still be a teacher, but you are going to join my class as a student. So I think most of you have been to a few workshops like this before. You probably know the drill. You go to classroom.google.com. Make sure you're in your sandy.net account. If you are in your personal Gmail account or something like that, it will not work. You won't be able to join my class. So Yeah, my computer's a little slow today. Let me copy that code for you. I'll paste it in the chat. Now, if you are watching this recording and playing along at home, you probably won't be able to do this. But if you are live in my session today, please go ahead and join my classroom.google.com. And since we are low numbers today, I'm going to need all of you in there if you possibly can, because I'm going to need some examples on that. We will skip this GIF about how to do that. There's a lovely GIF about how to click the plus sign. I'm assuming you all know how to do that by now. And I'm going to just slide over to my classes. So we have a practice class. Again, here's the code. I'm going to add one more student to that class because I happen to have a kid in San Diego Unified and I can fake being him. Plus sign, join code. He'll be a student in my class too. All right. So when you arrive at the practice class, it probably looks something like this if you're a student. And there is a first assignment, first practice quiz. That's great. I might see that assignment in the stream and click on it and go to the assignment, or I might, as a student, just go to classwork. If I go to classwork, I see I have a first practice quiz there as well. I will click on that, and I see a link to my practice Google form. Now, if you're already here, please go ahead and fill out that form so that we can get some data to play with and work with. So you click on first practice quiz, and you can fill out the quiz. All right, so I can't type, but I have filled out the quiz. All right, I'm done. Oh, last question. What was the random word? I'm not going to tell you guys. You got to know the random word yourselves. All right. So now when I, as a teacher, come over to classwork, I can look at the first practice quiz. And I have 0 turned in. Oh, darn. I might have to tell you the random word anyway. Actually. Now, as a student, I get this option to view my score and see how I did because it is set to be immediately after each response, or open the assignment. If I choose open the assignment, it takes me back to Google Classroom. And I have the option to unsubmit. Sometimes kids have to come here and also like mark it as done. But it is submitted, so it's in there. All good. And then I can view the assignment here too. Still in there, says I got it done. Says no work attached. That's normal, and it freaks kids and teachers out sometimes. But there was no work to attach. There was just the form. That was the only thing. So I wish this didn't say this because the work is attached. The kid submitted the form. It's done. But that's just the way it is. All right. So here on the teacher side, I have 2 turned in. Maybe one more if you could do it. Come on, Monica. I hope you're working on it. Thank you. So I've got a little data, right? I've got 2 turned in. But I'm looking over here and I don't have any scores. Why not? Where'd my scores go? You could spend all day over here going, where are the scores? Do I click on these 3 dots? No, I don't want to return it. Do I click on the student's name? No, that doesn't show me their grade. It says no grade. What do I do? Right? This is so vexing as a teacher. I'm like, I can't figure it out. And then finally over here, there's a button that says import grades. It's way too far over on the right. It's not easy to see, but that's what you need. You got to click import grades, and it's going to be wrong because there's some short answer questions or some written answer questions in there that I have to grade by hand, but I'm going to import the grades anyway, and it's going to bring them in. And it says everybody got 5 or 4 or something like that. But I still can't tell what those short answer ones were. I can't tell, you know, how people, I don't even like, okay, so how do I grade their short answer questions? What do I do? This is the part Google Classroom doesn't tell you anywhere. So since this quiz was actually worth 7 points, there's a couple questions I as a teacher need to go grade. I'm not sure how Google thinks you're going to get there, but this is what I do. I click on the quiz, which actually takes me to the student version of the quiz, which is also not going to help me grade it. Then I click on the pencil icon, because I know that pencil icon will take me to the editing version of the quiz. And that's a little closer. And I can see here that I have 3 responses. So I click on my 3 responses. And now I get the summary. On the response tab, it looks different now than it did when I showed it to you on the slide. There are now 3 responses. And these 3 words have popped up: summary, question, and individual. Those weren't there before because we didn't have any responses yet. I needed your responses to make that part work. So you can see the points distribution. And sometimes I pull this page up in class and look at it with my students. We can also see the frequently missed questions. We can see who filled out the form, both by email address and by name. I asked you where you work, so I can see where you work. I asked you how much you already know about Google Forms. You picked 1 and 3 because I was Connor and I picked 5. I asked you how many question types there were. It was 11. Right? We worked on that. It was in the answer key practice, remember? I'll take you back. Remember this slide? How many question types are there in Google Forms? 11. Yeah, just seeing if you're paying attention. Okay. You can customize the header image. You know that, we talked about it. You can customize the font and text size. This is a trick question. You can change the font to 4 different choices. You can't really customize it, but you can change it. And the text size you're kind of stuck with. Kids can make it bigger on their own screens by hitting Control+ to enlarge the text on their screen, but you can't change the size of the text in your form. You can add images, yes. What day is it? Thursday. But you'll notice that like all of these are green. No matter what day you picked, it would have been right. I think we're at that point in distance learning where no matter what day you think it is, I'm okay with that. And I teach this workshop on different days, and I don't want people to get that wrong. How do you want to use Google Forms with your students? And what was the random word? Now, none of us got the random word right. All right, we all missed the random word. So let's look at something here. I'm going to click the eyeball so I can see the view version of the form. This is what it looked like when you filled it out. Here in the form description box, I can add directions or information. Monkey, random word. Keep in mind, people often don't read this because they jump right to the questions. All right, so this is an important lesson for you. You're going to try and write things up here in your description about your form. You're going to give your kids directions, tell them things you want to do, and they're not going to read any of it just like you didn't. So remember, either put in a random word and then ask them about it, or put in some questions later on that ask them about what you wrote at the top, because they're not going to read that otherwise. All right, coming back to our responses. The form is still accepting responses. I could turn that off. I want to show you just the paint palette over here would let us change the theme or change the image. So I could change the image on the form to, I don't know, this microscope one. Looks cool. Insert that. Now when I go to view the form, it's going to look different. It's not going to have the snowflake anymore. At least it's supposed to not have the snowflake anymore. Try again. Reload. There we go. It's changed. So that's under the paint palette. That's also where you can customize the font style. And by customize, I mean there's like 4 you can choose from: decorative, formal, and playful. Keep in mind, decorative is almost impossible to read. Formal is also hard to read. Basic and playful are what you want for your kids to be able to access that, especially given students who have issues with dyslexia and things like that. The eyeball, as you've seen, takes me to the viewable version of the form. And the gear icon opens up general, presentation, and quizzes, those settings that we've seen before. Okay. I also want to just show you live what these 3 dots do. There's an undo option. Make a copy, move it to the trash. You decide you never want to see this form again. Get a pre-filled link, which I'm not going to go into, but it does actually have some interesting use cases if you want to come to my advanced Google Form workshop, if I ever teach it. You can print a form. I don't recommend it. It's not pretty. It turns, you make a form that you think is 1 page, and when you print it out, it's 4. Because Google provides space for kids to put their answers and stuff. If you have a kid going out on a homework contract or something, and you have to print some forms for them, I'll allow it, but I don't recommend it. You can add collaborators. So if you want to work on a form together. So for our 9th grade team, we use a common final. And so we are all collaborators on that common final. We can all add and edit questions when we work on it together. You're not going to use script editor, you're not going to use add-ons, and you might use some of your preferences, but we're not going to go into that now. You can poke around in there and see what you like. I do want to talk a little bit about making a copy and adding collaborators, because people often ask me for copies of my forms, many of my colleagues, and no offense, but I don't trust my colleagues. If I add a colleague as a collaborator on my form, they could just give that form to their students. Their students will start filling it out, and the data will come to me. It'll start ending up in my form. They won't even be, they'll have access to it through my form, but I don't want, you know, one of my other English colleagues to be using the exact same form and have their students' answers mixed in with my students' answers. So when a colleague asks me for one of my forms, I say, I'd be more than happy to give you a copy of that. I make a copy myself because I don't trust them to do it. You can add a collaborator and tell them to make a copy for themselves, but they won't. Make the copy yourself, add your colleague as a collaborator on the copy, all right? Do yourself a favor, make those copies separate from the ones you're using for yourself. And if a colleague does share a form with you because you asked them to, and they didn't know better, please make sure the first thing you do is go to the 3 dots, choose make a copy, so that when you edit that form, change that form, or start to collect data from your own students, it's only in your form. All right. The folder would tell you where this form is. I actually moved this one already. Oh no, it's still in my practice class. It's in my practice class. There we go. It's in the class for my Google Classroom. All right. Responses. Oh, spreadsheet. We got to go to the spreadsheet. So this green icon here, remember I promised you there'd be a spreadsheet there? This is where we go there. So I'm going to click that green icon, and it's going to take me to the spreadsheet of responses for this form. And the first time you make a form, the first time you make a spreadsheet for any form, the first time you click that spreadsheet icon, it's going to ask you if you want to create a spreadsheet or add to an existing spreadsheet. The answer is always create. You always want a clean new spreadsheet for each form you have. You never want to add the data from one form to a spreadsheet from something else. So here's our quiz data. These are the people who filled it out. Now, forms are tricky because they always give you the quiz data in these 1-inch columns. So notice a couple things. Number one, there are these timestamps. I know exactly when these people filled out this form. I have collected email addresses, so I know who you are. And if you're my students and you spell your name wrong, or I can't find you, I can always search you up by your ID number. I know your score. I know your name. I know where you teach. I know what you want to do with use forms for. And then I have all these answers to your multiple choice questions. And then I have some of your random word stuff, okay? So the interesting thing for teachers, yes, Donna, good question. We're going to come back to that. The interesting thing for teachers is when they get this data and it's all in these 1-inch columns, they have trouble reading it because they don't know a few things. One thing they don't know is that you can make columns wider. You just hover over the line between 2 columns and drag it over. So now you can see that easier, okay? The other thing they don't know is that you can wrap columns. So you can highlight a column, choose this little tool up here for text wrapping, and wrap it around. So it'll make it bigger that way too. So, and then if that's still not wide enough, you can drag it over. So when you're having students write answers and you want to be able to read them in your spreadsheet, you need to know to make the column wider and wrap the text. So text wrapping is hidden right there. Okay. The other thing that's helpful to know is how to hide columns. Like let's say I wanted to do something, but I didn't want to reveal who you were. I can click on this column that has your names in it and right click. Come on, Jen. Right click and choose to hide that column. So that data wouldn't be visible. So if I wanted to project the spreadsheet in my classroom for some reason, but hide who was who, I could hide the column, and then I could sort the column. Now, we don't have a lot of data in this spreadsheet, but if I sort this A to Z, I can see which of my students were struggling with this quiz, who had the lowest point value. Administrators love to talk about data-driven instruction. I'm a huge fan of data-driven instruction, but when a principal says data-driven instruction, I know the next thing I'm gonna see is a slide with state testing data. And that's not gonna help me at all as a teacher. What helps me as a teacher is the data I get from my kids' responses in here, and then being able to work with that data, being able to sort it and organize it in a way that makes sense and helps me group students for instruction or know who needs more instruction. So data-driven is awesome as long as you know what you're doing with your data. I forgot to show you one thing because we were coming across here and I got distracted. Summary data, we talked about that. Question, you can look at this by question. And this is how you can grade short responses in your form. Instead of, I'm not going to grade your names, obviously. You don't get a point for knowing your name. But I did ask this question about how do you want to use Google Forms with your students? If I go to that question, you'll see it brings up what your answers were. And I can click the green check to give you all credit for those answers. Or if your answer is wrong, I could click the X. As soon as I click the green check, it added a point to your score in your form. So now I have to save that. I always lose it down here in my Zoom windows, but I have to save that. And now when I come back to first practice quiz, remember you had 5, 4, 4? I'm going to import grades again into Google Classroom. And it's going to change those scores. Now it's 6, 5, 5. So it's because I gave those points within the Google form. Now, I honestly prefer to grade kids. I will sort of give them one grade in PowerSchool for their multiple choice and then another grade for their short answers. And I'll grade the short answers in the spreadsheet because that's a little easier for me. But if it works for you to grade in here, just, yes or no, did they get it right or wrong? Notice there's no partial credit, although I guess technically you could probably come in here and write 0.5, but that's a lot more steps for you. This is assuming the student either got it all right or all wrong. So if you had a 5-point question and they wrote an answer that you would like, I'd give that a 3 out of 5. Now you have to manually enter that 3. So either keep them all at 1 point and just give them, yes or no, right or wrong, or be prepared to manually enter scores. All right, and then the third one over here is individual. You can see how a particular student did. Come on, oh, I forgot to save something. You can see individually how a particular student did. You pick the student. We'll pick on Donna's today. And you can see how Donna did on her quiz and what she got right and what she got wrong. The only time I ever really use this is when my co-teacher comes up to me right after the kids took the quiz and says, how did so-and-so do? And I'm like, I don't know, let's go look. So we'll just go look right at that child's quiz that quickly. All right. I want to take us back to our slides for a moment so that I'm not leaving anything out. This is going to be a review, and we'll jump back and forth for a few minutes between the slides and the live stuff while I remember things I was supposed to show you. So remember that you click the green spreadsheet icon to view all student responses. That's important. And if it asks you to create a new spreadsheet, you say yes, create. Selecting an existing spreadsheet usually just convolutes your data. Just create a new one. If you reuse a post, which you're familiar with in Google Classroom, those of you who teach multiple periods, you create a quiz, you assign it to your second period class, and then you reuse that post for your third period class. It's going to give them the exact same form. It's not going to make a copy of that form for third period. So definitely ask that period question. And then if you really would need to see how kids did, remember it's going to dump all those responses into the same spreadsheet. So that's why you want that period question so you can sort by period and see how kids are doing. All right, here's what it looks like in the spreadsheet. Remember, you can sort by score. You can sort, if there's a period question, you could sort by period. You can sort by name, etc. That's not what I wanted. So spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are tricky. You can change the column width. Remember that. I showed you how to do that. Drag the line over. You can wrap text to view student responses. You can hide columns you don't need to see. So if you've got like I usually hide all the columns that have the multiple choice answers in them because I don't need to see them. The computer already graded that for me. I made you a little tutorial about using spreadsheets. It's bit.ly educ sheets. It teaches five things about spreadsheets in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to drop the link to that in your chat box there. So in that 5 minutes of your time, that little spreadsheet, each tab of the spreadsheet has a little colored box on it like this that gives you instructions about how to do the thing that you're learning to do on that tab. You'll learn to split names, which is helpful. If you just ask what's your name, as students write their first name and their last name, you want to split those and then sort by last name. Freezing and adding rows is helpful. Conditional formatting will mark things different colors for you based on their answers. So you could like sometimes color code your sheets. Wrap and resize columns. We talked a little bit about that today. Hide and unhide, we talked a little bit about today. So if you want to practice those things, this is a sheet that will talk you through it. As I said, I like to grade in the spreadsheet. So I'll just kind of pick a question and go down vertically and mark it bold if it's wrong and leave it alone if it's right. sort of the fastest way I've figured out to do that. Also, I don't grade every question. Just because they wrote it doesn't mean you have to grade it. A lot of times I'll ask my students a series of questions that are sort of building their understanding to what I really care about is the question at the end. In an actual classroom, I often make two students work together to fill out a form. So this student has Cask of Amontillado on her screen, and this student has a form asking them questions about Cask of Amontillado. I make them do that in joint. And there's usually either two name questions at the top or a question that says, you know, what's your name and your partner's name, put both of them in here. It makes it a little trickier to enter the grades in the grade book, but I only have half as many responses to grade, which is also the trade-off. Also, I make them both equally accountable for what happens on this form. And I'm an English teacher. If you don't capitalize anything in your answer, I'm going to take off a point. Not the whole point necessarily, but some part of your score is going to be a little lower because you couldn't find the shift key. So I tell kids that up front. And then, you know, there'll be some straight A kid who's got lost a few points or something. And I'll say, well, you didn't capitalize anything. And they'll say, well, my partner typed that. I'm like, you were sitting there, you're equally responsible. So I hold them accountable together for the answers. Like, you're sitting right next to them. It's your job to watch what they type and or trade off and take turns typing and check each other's answers. Kids, when they do this together, are way more engaged. A kid doing a form by themselves is a kid playing a video game. A kid doing a form with a partner is a kid who's accountable to someone else and they have to talk to each other. And often I don't even always read the responses to their submission because what I wanted was for them to have the dialogue about the subject in the classroom. So that's helpful. Here's an example of a custom header. We were reading The Possibility of Evil. Roses are featured in the story, so I put roses at the top of the form. You can do a Google search for images and add them to the tops of your forms. Try and avoid using things that are copyright protected. But if it's only being seen by your students in your classroom, there's an element of fair use in that as well. Here's some examples of forms I use in my classroom. Student data form at the beginning of the year. It's not a quiz. It is just, what's your name? What's your student ID number? What period are you in? Where did you go to school last year? Who was your teacher last year? Just data that helps me get to know them. Here's our 9th grade course evaluation that I mentioned already. This one from a very old man with enormous wings is questions about the story. And then the thing that saves my life the most is the request or regrade form. If you have kids emailing you, asking you to regrade assignments or telling you they finally turned something in or something like that, I just respond to all those emails with fill out the request or regrade form. And there's a link to it on my class website. Where they have to tell me everything they did to make their assignment better. They have to give me a link to their assignment, and then all of that data of those requests goes to a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet is organized. It is time-stamped. It is something I can access and my co-teacher can access. We can leave each other notes about what we regraded and why and when and whether or not we put it in PowerSchool. It is all together in one place. So instead of sitting down on a Sunday morning and trying to find all the emails kids sent me asking for regrades, all I have to do is go to my spreadsheet, see what's there, and they can't just send me an email that says, could you regrade that? And I'm like, what's that? I get all the information I want that way, and I stay organized. So I believe in performance-based grading. I want kids to have an opportunity to revise their work and improve it, so that's what makes that functionally possible for me. You can also add Google Forms from Google Drive, and I think I actually duplicated this slide, so let's look at the prettier one. So you can create a form in your Google Drive. You go to New, and the New button is not visible because I clicked on it. So New, More, Google Forms. And that form will not be a quiz by default, but if you want to turn it into a quiz, you can use the Settings gear icon and turn it into a quiz in the Quizzes tab. So this is how I usually make Google Forms, and then either I attach them in Google Classroom with the view link, or I put them on my class website. All right. Forms are tricky. Start small, be gentle with yourself while you learn, use them for formative assessments, especially during distance learning. Now, Donna did ask a question in the chat about audio to a form, to record audio for a form, like make a listening comprehension question. I think the only way I can think of to get audio into a form is to do it by inserting a video. So if you made a video that just said, this is a listening question on a screen and recorded your voice over it I would use Screencastify at this point. So Screencastify is a really great Chrome extension. And I think I probably sent you a code to get the unlimited access. So I would use Screencastify. either put words on the screen or put an image on the screen, ask them to listen to something you're saying, insert that video into your Google form, and then ask them some questions about it. That's exactly how I would do that. Remember, they're still going to call each other for the answers. I've given you a couple of resources for Google Forms. Getting started with Google Forms is a link to my document. It's 6 pages of like the very basics of Google Form. It reviews some of what we were talking about. 24 tips for Google Forms quizzes is from Eric Kurtz, who runs an awesome blog called Control-Alt-Achieve. And there's a lot of tips from him there specifically about quizzes. I am Jen Roberts. You can access these slides at bit.ly/GC5forms. You can email me if you have questions at jroberts4@sandy.net. I will stay and take any questions you have from the chat. And I would ask that those questions first be just about Google Forms while we're still recording. And then if you start to have questions that are about other ed tech issues or things, I will just stop the recording and answer whatever you want for as long as you want. That's all I got.